power to the people. Looking through my peephole, who's knocking at my door? Who is it? They say we ain't equals.
It's been a lot going on since the last time we spoke.
Man, on every level, right? Racism being exposed, everyone going through these months of COVID, coming to a full uprising in the streets. It's really, really intense right now, and also pretty beautiful in certain ways.
Yeah. What do you think, Peyina?
Yeah, I'm in agreement with Noah. I think there's definitely a lot going on, and there's this dance between speaking up, still socializing with the groups that expect certain norms, and figure out how to then, go against the stream a little bit without completely being sidelined just because you spoke up too much. Right.
It's funny because when you say that, it's reminding me of, like, we're seeing a lot of these companies stand up right now, right? They're all coming out with these corporate statements and, being anti-racist or being pro-Black in a way that we've never seen happen before. And, as I'm watching them come out daily, it's also this, is it enough to just make a statement, right? Is that a checkbox activity, or like what's really happening, or what needs to happen, behind the scenes?
Can I ask you first, Sacha, how you're doing as well?
Mm-hmm.
Oh,
Where your heart and head have been at in this group?
that's actually where my heart and head has been, honestly. It's been this, just really thinking about how genuine, not just company, people are at this time. And really thinking through, why people are just now waking up to voices that have been screaming for hundreds of years.
White people and Black voices specifically?
Yeah. Yeah. And so that's kind of, why I wanted to touch this topic, because I'm sitting here thinking like, wow, a lot of these companies have come out with these statements. And then you flip it and you see all of the EEOC, cases that have come out about racism within these same companies. That's been top of mind for me.
I think it can be definitely a good starting point and something new to the narrative. I mean, thinking back to the 60s when the white corporate presence around the Black Power movement and around Vietnam was love it or leave it. So this definitely seems like a pivot point. And we know that in a market-driven economy, without necessarily equity baked in, that can be very surface level. What's coming up for me, though, personally, is real rawness on one level. I've shared with you in past calls and in our friendships, as a white man, as a man with white skin in this country, and is privileged through a systemic racism by that. In other words, I feel like I have the wind at my back often and don't have to face some of the life or death situations that certainly my Black skin colleagues face, and certainly even my colleagues of color face. What's real for me, though, is that my Black daughter saw the images this time around of George Floyd being killed and heard my wife and I talking about Breonna Taylor being murdered. And so at 7 years old, asking my Black wife and her white dad, are the police going to kill me? And tears coming out of that. And then walking back into a world of kind of corporate work with a lot of white colleagues who have a good heart and actually do this type of work, but maybe don't have that emotional experience. And so the anger and the concern and frustration that I bring in from my family, still knowing that I am physically safe in some ways that they are not, is almost not palpable, and it seems to threaten people. So just all of that going on at once. And then, if I might add one more personal level, also noticing too that even though I've been striving to be on this path of white co-conspirator against racism for a long time, I'm also stepping on my Black colleagues' toes right now, because I'm not in the same emotional place they are. And sometimes I am microaggressing unintentionally, and just processing that as well. So I connect that back to the original question by saying, if companies aren't doing this culture work and this leadership work on some of these emotional places, even getting stinky with it and messing up and owning that through vulnerability and restorative justice, then that slogan is just a slogan. But if that's used as a starting point, for instance, if Juneteenth becomes a national holiday and my daughter wakes up in a country where that's part of the fabric, yeah, I believe that's part of changing the national discourse.
Yeah.
You
said something just now that kind of triggered me in a good way, was, you know, you feeling as if you're stepping on people's toes. And in my gut reaction to that was, I would rather you step on my toes than ignore that I'm around. Right. And I think that's been a lot of what I've been experiencing. Right. We have a lot of folks that are passionate about diversity and inclusion. And then for the last month have been ghost. Right. Like they haven't even checked in. Like, how are you doing? How can I help? And so I realized I started checking out. And just saying, you know what, I'm good.
And again, are we talking about white folks, Sacha? Sorry, I'm just trying to be all types of folks. I mean, I want just really trying to make sure I'm listening in for the impact.
I think it's, what I'll say is this: it's folks that are passionate about diversity when it comes to gender, and nothing else, right? So everything else makes them uncomfortable. And so what I've noticed is, just throughout people that I've talked to in this space, there are a lot of DEI practitioners that are specific to gender. And so during these times, that intersectionality, you know, you're expecting to come up, doesn't come up. And just really having to call folks out on that. And so what I'm seeing with corporations is they've hired a lot of these folks that are passionate about gender, because gender was the safe place for corporations to go. Right. And then now,
because of white womanhood,
because of white, well, yeah, definitely.
Okay. I know, you know, I just know we're talking to people all over.
Yeah,
they're all clued in.
Yeah, I mean, it's because it's safe, right? It's the safe place to start. But then what's happening right now is, okay, your employees of color, your Black employees are speaking up and speaking out, and these folks don't know what to do, because they've never thought about it in this space. And so what I'm seeing then is companies then leaning in further on their Black employees that are already traumatized by what's going on to educate everybody else.
I would love to hear, Peyina, your reflection on that. I mean, we talk a lot about, you know, me talking to white men, but I've heard so much for you as an Asian American woman that's aware of anti-Blackness and the discrimination you faced in your own experience. How are you kind of hearing some of what Sacha's saying and connecting it back to our question?
Yeah. I definitely identify with what Sacha is saying, and thank you for bringing me in. And I think that I definitely identify with what Sacha's saying. There's a lot of relying on Black employees, Black and brown, you know, and kind of almost using them as a token to say, like, oh, if I relied on you, I'm doing okay. But it almost feels as though, I'm sorry, there's something ringing over here. Let me cancel that. It's almost as though it's unclear whether it's coming from an authentic place on understanding the situation, as opposed to like a reactionary response to, I need to check this box. I've done it. I have a Black employee. I've checked in with this Black employee. I'm doing my work. And it's almost coming out of, I wonder, you know, I'm not blaming, I'm saying it's good for organizations to start thinking about, are we doing this as a self-interest so that we look good? Or are we really understanding where our values, our intentions lie, and be driven by those values and unpack those as to how that's going to guide our purpose and how that's going to guide our actions? So I definitely identify with that. And to speak more concretely, I think I just have this example. I'm just going to keep it really, really vague to not affect anyone for confidentiality, but also say I'm collecting data for an organization about how their perceptions are about their aspirations, visions, how they would like to contribute, as well as their knowledge or comfort around DEI issues, and whether they would like more training on the issues. And some things came out that were really, really interesting. I was really appreciative. And as I was debriefing the leadership, one of the things that I was told was, when you report, let's just focus on the positives.
Of course.
And that's when.
That's why we're here.
That's why we're here right now. That's why we got to say, yo, all lives don't matter, because Black lives don't matter.
Right. And so you're saying, oh, as an Asian American woman, how do I respond to that? And it's really interesting because in some way, I could be really reactionary right then and just go like, what are you talking about? But I have to also be smart about how to do this. And I know some people would disagree with me about just like enough tactfulness, just speak up, But at the same time, if I just revealed exactly how I feel or thought, I would possibly just be out of the picture, and then I have no more influence, no more way of moving forward or seeing that things get shaped in a way that it's thinking about the whole systemic issue going on worldwide. So
I've heard some Asian colleagues and Asian American colleagues talking to me candidly around race and feeling like I can get a pass at times from white culture if I go along to get along, and I can immediately raise suspicion as a foreigner if I speak out on any element of diversity. And noticing that as a white man in America, I have a privilege of not even being put into that bind. So I don't face the target of anti-blackness, and I don't face that bind of pick a side, but either way, potentially go against yourself within doing that. So that's, I notice that I feel sad hearing you say that in a sense.
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting in you saying that, because I think what is happening now that has not happened before are people are making the choice of speaking up. Like, I would rather take the risk and speak up and see what happens, right? So,
Absolutely.
we were talking about, like Adidas came out with their statement, and immediately their Black employees were like, oh, that's not happening in here, right?
Yep.
You can't say Black Lives Matter when we're getting treated like X, Y, and Z. Right. And so that's the part that I think is very different right now, and why, these statements can't just be statements, because those employees they're feeling empowered in a way to speak up and to say, you know what, we can't take this anymore. And like, you can't say that.
It's risky.
It's very risky.
Before, I'm married to a Black woman who very a white collar professional, very, very good in her career, and one of very few Black people in this white space. And so their company released a statement. I'm not going to say the company, it's Fortune 500, released their statement, but they've been known for not really doing this internal work for a long time. So here she is with a well-meaning white boss then that shows a video. They're supposed to show videos for group discussion day. She's like the only Black woman on the team, or maybe one of two. Plus, we're in the Pacific Northwest, so very heavily white culture and kind of passive aggressive. Right?
Yes.
So my wife, bless her soul, man, like she's for real with it, and that she's very tactful. She actually is much of an introvert, but she's felt for a long time, I do bite my tongue a lot, and I need to speak up right now on different levels. And so she did, and the white silence that she got in return for that, she had to stay up all night, like wondering like, how is she going to be treated when she goes in the office the next day? I've checked in with her a couple times today. So even that, like, if you say that as a company and you're not looking at the mental health, and as you both are saying, the resources, your pay structure, all of that, then we have a longer discussion to happen. I'm okay meeting folks in the road right now, really with the outside tension of the street protesters demanding a more perfect union of us, and from the teachers and the pastors that really live up to their profession, educating minds about that. I'm okay lifting and advocating within corporate spaces right now and finding alignment. I think that there is some real work to be done in that.
You both brought up something really interesting, which is so what does an employee do if the organization is putting up a statement in a certain way? They want to speak up, but they might not, or we, or when I say they, I may be including myself, do not feel feel like they don't have the support, right? Know that the right thing to do is to speak up, but are fearful of it. And so even if they didn't care, even if they spoke out and then moved on, it's like, even if we knew that what we need to do is examine ourselves. Why am I fearful now? What am I learning from this? What do I need to do? Even if we know all these things about asking these questions, and one person, it's a majority issue. One person in an organization cannot bring in the support needed to make that change. So what can a person like that do? Right?
That's the question.
I think I'm the wrong person. I was about to say, I'm the wrong person to ask.
I think that's right. I think so there's all this talk right now. For instance, should white people or non-Black DEI folks even be in this space right now? I think that's a very prudent question. It's been around forever.
Say that again.
Should DEI practitioners that are not Black even be in this conversation and space right now? And it ties back into this. And I appreciate, I'm listening to how Sacha just responded. And, you know, as a white man striving to be a co-conspirator against racism, I think that the space is, again, for white people to recognize that racism is a white problem, and to actually use that language, and to recognize that generationally, even amongst us, amongst progressive ranks, there's been a stifling and a ceiling, and we've kind of police toned certainly Black bodies, but even those of us with white skin amongst ourselves that raise those ideas and have for 15, 20, 50 years in community. And so I'm seeing that opening going on. There's definitely a generational shift in some ways, and it doesn't mean that the younger generations have it all right either. But I think if you can be a white practitioner and speak to right now, like I told my wife, you know, I wish there were white people that were speaking up publicly for you right now. That's what organizations need to look at that as a key metric of success for equity. When a Black or brown person raises an issue, first off, are white people raising those issues too? And are white people coming to their support? You know, my wife was like, 5 people said to me behind my back, thanks for speaking up, that were white. And I see on the internet, I think they call those secret allies or down low allies or something like that. It's like, don't do that shit, man. And, you know, being an ally is not bearing witness to injustice passively. Being an ally is figuring out, how do I intervene in society or perhaps in my own mind to look around this and tap into something deeper, more inclusive, and beyond my own bias, which I'm not bad for having, and is a byproduct of internalized messages from a racist society, even with white skin. That was a lot of words. How's everybody doing?
Well, no, but thank you, Noah. And I want to circle back to Sacha, because that was really helpful information to think in terms of how the role of white allies and how someone in the situation that I was describing above could potentially reach out to supporters that might have more power. But I would like to hear what Sacha thinks. Like she said, don't ask me. And I'm wondering, like, where are you coming from? How can you say that?
Well, no, because Noah actually touched on some of it, right? So I think this is, I've been very vocal in my white colleagues needing to step up. And I have actively placed some true allies, not self-appointed allies, true allies in front of me to answer questions, to educate. And I have a few that say, yes, whenever you need me to do that, step in, because I will take that burden off of you. So I've used my white allies in that space. I say I'm not the one because I'm always probably the most vocal.
Right. You are the one. That's why you're not the one. You
always
are the one.
You know, that's most vocal. But I think it's a cultural thing, right? So I come from a family and a culture that speaks up. More so probably my family than necessarily the Caribbean culture. But my family's a very vocal family, right? We unapologetically speak our minds. And so some people see that as questioning authority, but I'm one of those people, unless I truly understand where you're coming from, I'm not going to follow you. Right. And so I always ask questions. I always challenge, because I want to make sure that it makes sense. And it's not just because this is the way we've always done it. That doesn't mean it's the right thing to do. So I've always been that employee wherever I am. Anybody that's watching this that has worked with me could say this. That will challenge the status quo. And so I appreciate, and I see folks that are they're conscious of, this is a dangerous thing for me to speak up. And so I'm trying to think through, like, how would I coach somebody to do something, right? And so I always look at, well, who are the leaders that you trust that can help you raise these issues? How can you raise the issues in a way that you're also giving solutions? Right? Because that's what leaders want. They don't want you to just complain. Okay, how are you going to solve it? So come with the complaint, but also come with the solutions, and be prepared to step into
come
that.
With an observation, or come with an observation rather than
right.
Yeah, again, the idea of white people in this case, since we're talking about systemic racism, white supremacy, whatever label we're using, the idea that not just, it's like the double-edged sword of, no, you don't just jump into into action, solving for Black people. And yes, do jump into action, raw as it might be, in intervening with white people, and continue to refine that process and allowing others
and
to
learn, but be comfortable with failing in that process. And I think
you're not doing the process if you don't.
right. And I think that's the part of the problem is people want to be perfect in this. And so kind of to your point from earlier, like, oh, I don't want to step on toes. I would rather you step on my toes and me say, ouch, and we work through that than for you not to show up at all.
No, I share with you one example I got in recently was, I think, just asking to share a message on social. Oh no, I shared a Black woman's message around social justice on Black media, and they're understandably, I get this. She wrote back and said, you didn't ask my permission, and really getting down to consent and white men appropriating Black women's work. I totally am in a place in my journey where that is not shocking, and where that I actually would think someone would even care enough about me to let me know what's really good. And then I remember I tried that technique a few days later with another post from another poster that I saw, and it kind of backfired. And that time I understand too. I don't think when white supremacy is disrupted that everybody all of a sudden is all all good after years of everything. Like, and I'm still privileged in that moment. So I expect the toe stepping to happen. I think what's important for white people to understand, though, is we're so conditioned with fairness and equality as opposed to equity that we think peace before justice. We think I take a step towards you, you take a step towards me. I take a step towards you, you take a step towards me. And what I've learned so much is that I'll get to peace, but I need justice first. I took 1,000 steps to come into this world today that you're privileged in. I need you to take one step towards me in a learning stance. So I think that helps us in those moments.
And I would like to point out that what Sacha was describing and what you're describing now could happen in a situation where it's not necessarily, especially if we're talking in the corporate environment, it's not necessarily like Black to white or person of color to white. It could just be a matter of more the senior, like whoever your boss is, and whoever down there is. And if it's okay, something that came up to me was a long time ago, I saw a talk by Stacey Abrams. Actually, she was answering questions, and people were telling her, like, I don't know what to do. People don't listen to me. I speak and nobody listens, and something like that. And I think I'm totally paraphrasing wrong, but her answer was along the lines of, she uses her stories not as a way to convince people, but as a way to find a common ground, find that connection with the other person, so that they could start understanding where she's coming from, and maybe they'll start sharing their story with her too. And I thought that was really, really powerful, because going back to the example of, well, I don't want to speak up so much that I'm sidelined. It's now, I think it's less about fear. So in the past, it may be more about fear. And actually, I shouldn't say that, because at some point in time, it's like, I am like your family. My family is like your family, Sacha. We just like speak up, although people don't expect that, right? So people get like, oh, what's this Asian lady doing? She speaks up too much,
right?
and then messing it up, effing it up, right? And then getting silent. And then after that, it was a reaction. It's like, oh, I shouldn't speak up. But now it's less about that. Now it's more about, I need to learn. I am learning how to meet the other person where they are, so that we can go in this journey longer. And hopefully through that journey, I can bring them along without, it's because it's not me, hey, come along, but it's like, it's that connection that enabled them to by themselves join, right? So, yeah.
And the same, coming back to you, Sacha, as we get ready to close out to hold us down, but for me, that the sameness difference of that, and why that's so important, what you just said, Peyina, is as a leader, how am I emotionally equipping myself to potentially do that with everyone, right? That's part of it. Even it doesn't mean to be an expert, but just getting in that mindset. But then even in our own communities, Peyina, like, how am I holding space for other Asians to find solidarity with ourselves and also examine anti-Blackness? Noah, how am I holding space to really do what Peyina is doing with other white people and understand racism is in this country is essentially a white problem? I'm imagining, Sacha, your version of it. How do I hold space with other Black professionals and Black community and heal in this and bring our best selves forward as a collective and individually? So, by meeting people where they are in our own communities too, that's really where some of this work is called for. And then we come back together in our larger communities, practicing these skills and learn how to do this together in a restorative way, either in our businesses or our places of worship or the places we live.
Yeah.
Sacha, coming back to you.
What part? Like, what do you what?
That
No,
part.
What I was just thinking through was, we started at the top with, our corporate statement's enough. And so what I'm hearing is no, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like there's fundamentally more work that needs to be done. There's healing, there's growing, there's equity that needs to be addressed, like throughout the company, but also within individuals within that company. And so that's just a lot of work that needs to really follow all of these statements, right? And so as I'm thinking through kind of, a call to action on what people can do is a couple of things kind of bubble up for me. One, I always say, like, do the work, but that means, understand yourself, because some folks are passionate and want to get into this, but they've not done that self-evaluation of where they truly are in this space and understanding their biases. Two, to Noah's point around equality versus equity, like understanding what that means and what equitable programs can be put in place to do that. And then, the last thing is kind of to give, right? So African American Museum in DC is a place that I love to go. They're doing some amazing work around let's talk about race right now. And so that's where I'm putting a lot of my funds and my dollars behind that, is because they're using this virtual platform that we're all forced to be a part of to educate the masses, right? And so the more we can do that, I think that kind of helps us all through our personal journeys.
I love that. Peyina, what have you been doing as we close out?
Yeah, well, thank you for that, Sacha. I think that's really helpful to hear, especially the part that kind of bubbled up for me was, so yes, there's a lot of work that we need to do individually, and we're constantly, this is a never-ending continuum. The more I learn, the less I feel I know. And
yeah,
right. And at the same time, it is so important to reach out to established organizations that have been doing this work for a long time, because for me, that's a psychological issue too. Knowing that I can have some group organization to lean on and to guide me in the process, that I'm not doing this alone. And that's very powerful. And so I've been leaning on some organizations that have gathered people from the perspective of how Asian Americans can support Black lives, just because there's a lot of dialogue that needs to happen amongst Asian Americans, our own anti-Blackness, especially from our older generation, and how stories of how individual families have been able to, through the connection that they have their parents, not sort of educated, but say like, oh, I would like you to understand this, and let them know the different narrative, as well, being challenged by other folks that are much more knowledgeable in this about how being in a relationship with a white man requires me to also put a little effort there and let my partner see how important of a role he can have, because he's the one that actually can be in between the police and the Black person, right? He's the one that can actually make change in a meaningful way. And so those are the things that, I've been bubbling up and I'm working along.
I'm appreciating the thought you both put in that. I'm gonna just riff right off of that. Certainly today, as we talk about corporate statements, today being the first time in American history that Juneteenth is just being uttered so mainstream, and in their states right now where people literally have the day off. I definitely think, again, I'm not totally cynical about that. If that leads to the establishment of a national holiday, good. And white people, whether it's the New York Post Day or the Black authors that have been putting out these words for 150 years, like, yeah, we need to understand today what this holiday is and begin to read. Closely associated with that, in my version of the 21-day challenge, every white person next 21 days needs to figure out how to spend an hour intentionally every day, 21 days in a row, thinking about race and anti-racism. I use those terms specifically. Reading authors of color, certainly talking to other white people about your reactions, journaling your thoughts, spending your dollars in Black establishments. There's lists everywhere. Dollars do circulate and dollars do create future. So please be conscious of how you use that energy. Those would be places I would go to. And, without getting too much on the bully pulpit, because I don't think voting by itself ends all. I came too much from a community organizing background to ever fully say that the American vote is what changes the narrative totally. Yet voting is a narrative, and get out there and frickin' vote.
Yes,
So,
and write letters to your councilmen, to your senators, to your
Speak up,
congressmen.
yes.
It's just because if we want our votes to count for something, we also need to express what is it that we want. What are the demands? And so, speaking of that, I want to bring what Sacha brought up when we were preparing for this. Sacha, if it's okay for me to share that, which is research, validate the organizations that you want to support. Because I just read on the news about like organizations putting millions of dollars in an organization that they later realized wasn't the authentic organization. And so understand what are the values or the demands that the organization is making before you put your dollars.
Due diligence, right? It's not this reactionary response. It's be strategic about it. And I think the other thing, that we talked about, and making sure this is really how we're closing up is, what do we do beyond Juneteenth, right? What happens on Monday?
Right.
What happens next month?
Right.
And so really being strategic about this, because it is not a sprint, it is a marathon. And so we're going to continue to have these conversations months and years from now. And so what do we do to sustain that? And I think that's what we all need to kind of walk away thinking about.
Power to the people, looking through my peephole, who's knocking at my door.
Thank you again to all of you for taking the time to tune in. And we most look forward to you, listeners, becoming part of this ongoing community, sharing your equity stories, and getting in network with us and each other. Please join us on our LinkedIn platform at www.linkedin.com/groups/1241120, or simply click our LinkedIn icon on our YouTube channel. We look forward to hearing from you next time.
Motherfuckers building black on purpose, prominent, wrapped in back to dominant.